My name, Bill Mogenroth. I got as high as corporal, but I let a grenade go off in a company area, and they were unhappy, and they broke me down again. They didn't like it at all.
Some people say you only make rank if you do it twice.
Well, I didn't care anyway because I wasn't going to make a career out of it. I was more interested in going home. I thought that was enough of that killing.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's got to be done, but I don't want to do it. I did it.
How old were you when everything started?
Well, I got to be 21 when I was in the Marine Corps. So that was a little over halfway through.
When did you join? How old were you and where were you?
Well, I got drafted twice, and they rejected me the first time, and I couldn't figure out why. So I asked him it was a big draft board in Chicago. I guess there must have been 100 people went through there that day. And I went up and talked to them, and they said, well, maybe somebody made a mistake where they took the pictures of the chests, the photography mistake. And he told me where to go to the TB Center in Chicago, and they would do it again. I went there, and the guy said I was okay. So I figured, well, if they don't want me, I'm going to go home then. And I think it was about 5 months later, I got another 1A, come to the draft board, you're drafted again. So I went down there the second time, went through the same procedure. It's an all-day thing, it's a big thing. And at the end of the test, somebody told me that I should go down the hall and the first door on your left if I want to be a Marine. You don't get in the Marine Corps by being drafted. You must sign for it. You must volunteer. He says, if you want to be a Marine, you're eligible. I didn't go down there. I thought I was going in the Army. So I thought, well, maybe I'd like to do that. So I went down and I told him I'll be a Marine. And I signed up, and that was it. I always have this little notch which I can maybe brag about. The Marine Corps joined me. I didn't join them. But anyway, that was the story.
Were you nervous when you got drafted and when you joined up?
I was nervous to the fact that the first time that I got drafted, they rejected me, and I had a goodbye thing at work and everything. And I felt like a reprobate going back there again. It makes you feel a little bit bad. But the second time, everything was much different. It went normally.
Did you know what you were getting yourself into?
Not exactly, but we had, Chicago Tribune, we had a lot of pictures and stories about all fronts, Europe and the Pacific, so I had some idea.
So would you say that the other guys who were joining at the time, were they nervous? Sounds like you is happy-go-lucky.
Well, you were nervous because I think you probably had a little bit of pride. You wanted to be able to pass the 1A test. Of course, there's girlfriends involved and all that stuff. You don't want to come back as a reprobate that couldn't make it, and I did that once. So that's how it was. They would make fun of the guys sometimes that couldn't pass the draft test.
It was a point of pride because so many people were needed.
Exactly, yeah.
How did things change right after you fully enlisted?
Well, it was pretty fast. I went to San Diego to boot camp. That was pretty rough. I didn't like that at all, but nobody does. And then I went from boot camp there to Camp Pendleton, which is down at Southern California. And I went through some training, but then they sent us to the big Camp Tarawa in Hawaii. And that was a long training. We trained for Iwo Jima, really. And that's sort of the steps that I was in.
What did they tell you when you were training? What did they tell you about what you were going to face?
Well, see, we were all for a specific thing. My group was with demolition, rockets. That was the small rockets that you shoot from your shoulder, and of course demolition was the main thing that I got in there from. And I think I learned a lot of it from my father. He was in building homes, and if you're going to blow up a building or something, you want to know where to put the dynamite or the TNT or whatever you're going to use to get the most effect. and I a little bit pretty knew much about construction, but not how to wreck them. But you can reverse it in a hurry.
So, was that a fun part of the job?
Well, it's kind of fun if you like to, you try things out. You wonder, uh, how things would go if you put they had composition C something. You could make forms of this stuff. It was kind of like dough. For instance, you could go up to a tank. Tanks go very slow, and you could catch them on foot quite often. And if you wanted to get that tank put out of business, and if you had some of this composition C, it was like a dough, and you would put it on there in a shape. And they call it a shape charge now. And it concentrates all that energy from that thing when it goes off to cut the metal. And the guy inside's in trouble. And things like that. You learn things, and it's destructive at wartime, but it's constructive otherwise. So it's interesting.
I saw that in the movie,
Did you?
Saving Private Ryan.
Yeah,
Did you see that one?
I couldn't hear you.
Saving Private Ryan
I didn't see it.
is a good one.
No, we used to fish with dynamite and TNT in Hawaii. You get on a pier and a bunch of fish come along, so you get a little block of TNT, you throw it in the water, you got all kinds of fish.
Made lunchtime a lot easier, right? After you trained, how long did it take for you to get to the front?
Oh, I guess about roughly, I would say, just a little over a year. We trained quite a long time. We trained at different islands. I was kind of glad too, because I always wanted to see the islands and see who lived there and how they lived, and we'd take that island and this island, and you'd get around quite a bit.
So were you in part of what you might call the reserve that was behind the advancing front, and until you reached the front?
Well, I went in the first day one. I went in noon, day one. The first wave went in about 8 o'clock. I went in just before noon, and I was there for the whole thing.
Iwo Jima.
Iwo Jima. That's what we were trained for. It was bad there. It was terrible. A small island, but boy, there was a lot of blood.
Prior to that, were you hopping islands in the rear? What I'm trying to say is those islands were cleared and were captured by the U.S., and then you were coming up behind.
Well, those islands, some of them were islands that we controlled, or somehow we got the okay to go in practice. They were just practice islands, and we'd pretend like we were taking over and so forth.
How much of that did you do prior to Iwo Jima? You did that for about a year, you said.
That's about right. I would guess that's about right, yeah.
Can you tell me again what happened on the day that you landed on Iwo Jima? What wave you were in? Can you tell me again?
The first wave went in at 8 o'clock in the morning. We had ships as far as you could see around that island. And I could see the Higgins boats going from some of the ships towards the island. The first wave went in about 8 o'clock in the morning. I went in right before noon. And it was the landing craft where the front end drops out. I don't know if you're familiar with those boats. They're Higgins boats, they call them too. You could put a Jeep on or a lot of Marines, or anyway, you'd get aboard the boat, and when it hit the island, the ramp on the front would drop out. Everybody on there, every Marine on there had his helmet disconnected and his pack disconnected, because they learned that if you didn't, it would weight you down if you got into deep water and drown you. So we could quickly get out of whatever we had on our head or on our back. So we'd come up to the island, but it was very steep going onto the sand. And some of the boats had Jeeps. The Jeeps couldn't climb it. It was just too steep. And sand crumbles as you're skidding in it. So then they got a bunch of Marines, and sometimes a couple of Jeeps up high with ropes to try to pull those Jeeps up. In the meantime, the Japanese were up on Mount Suribachi shooting the guys doing this, you see, and bodies all over. A lot of bodies were being, a lot of the boats were sunk, the Higgins boats. And you had that in the water too. It was not a nice scene.
So were you in a hurry getting off? When you landed, were you in a hurry?
No, I wasn't. What I was in a hurry to do was to dig a hole because a foxhole gave you very good protection. The only place a foxhole didn't work well was when they were shooting from up above, or if you had a lot of shell bursts, because then it could get you. But we were pretty much held up there when we first landed because the Japanese owned the high ground, and we didn't. They were there for a long time, and they were shooting from the high down right at us, and they were getting us pretty bad.
When this came down, did you stay on the sand or did you advance?
You tried to run up and get out of the way so everybody else could get off of that boat, and you knew you had to climb up the sand hill to get onto a flat plain. And you also wanted to get out of the range of that mountain where those guys were shooting from the top down. And you tried hard to get out of that area. It was a focused area for the Japanese.
How long did you spend right in the vicinity of that beach?
I think we stayed there until the heavy artillery people from the boats started shooting up at the island too. And the Japanese, I think, moved because there was a lull. And by that time, we went up on the island when shooting slowed down.
A couple hours?
I guess that would be pretty close, yes.
Did you have to shoot back or you were waiting for support?
Well, we didn't have too much time to shoot back. We did if we could. But we ran up there, and of course we only had a half a day left. And we got up on the flat part of the island, and it was starting to be nighttime. And we knew we had better get a foxhole because those Japanese were all around. And they would be moving up. Some of them who didn't go up with their unit would move at night with the cover of darkness. And we had a lot of trouble at night. The first night it was very bad. The Japanese that were not with their group going forward, now that it was dark, were going to go join their group. And sometimes they would go fall into our foxholes with us. And we had bayonets on our rifles. We put bayonets on because we knew it could happen. And that was the first of the terrible fighting I heard. It wasn't in my foxhole, but it was a foxhole next to me. And these guys are getting the Japanese with an M1 rifle with a bayonet on it. And they're fighting like crazy. It really scares you for a little bit. You're not used to it yet, you know.
Of course, and you met people who went through that experience?
Yes, yes. And you saw what happened tomorrow if you're still there. It was bad.
What was your mission?
Well, we were trying to take the whole island. We were heading north on the island. And if we could run the Japanese into the water, or maybe wherever they would hide, Japanese wouldn't give up. They were good fighters, and they were fighting for the emperor, and the emperor was God. And it was a religious thing plus a political thing. And they almost wouldn't give up. I don't know that there was very few of them, of all of them that were on the island that did give up. Some of them did.
The task that you had as part of the demo unit?
I was in demolition.
What was your task?
Well, we were there to. They had in both wars, Europe too, and in the islands, they built real heavy concrete structures that they would go into with a little slit for a rifle to shoot out of, and they call it the embrasure. A rifle embrasure. Anyway, the Japanese would go in there, maybe two of them were in there, and they could hold back a whole battalion of Marines that way. You see, they'd stick the rifle out, and every time they'd see a Marine, they'd shoot. And if they'd shoot back, you couldn't get them because they were in this concrete bunker, a bunker arrangement. And one of my duties was to try to get rid of those things. And they were not easy to get rid of because they had all kinds of protection. But if you could get up close, you could run the rocket into that opening for their rifle. If you were a good shot, it would go in there and it would explode and kill them. And we also had flamethrowers. We could shoot in there. But as you were running up there, you were in a big bunch of danger because they could easily shoot you. And that's where I got, that was the day I got it.
That's when you got shot?
Well, what happened there was three of us. And our unit knew that we call them pillboxes. This pillbox was shooting at our unit as we were moving forward, and they got us to blow this unit up. See, we were demolition. So two guys one guy was from Germany, incidentally. Enders was his name, He and I and another pretty new guy, the three of us went up there to try to get rid of that thing. And there was holes all over the island in the sand because the ships were shooting heavy 12-inch shells. And it made it nice for protection if you want to move. If you get in a hole and you did a hole, it got you up there, you see. So we got up near the where this pillbox was. We were getting ready to put some put a shell into that brazier, and we were also getting ready to maybe blow it up if we could get near enough to it. And the other guy, this guy Enders, he went up the side of the bank where was a great big hole, maybe as big as this room, that a ship had dropped a big shell in from way out somewhere. And he's looking, and in the meantime, the guy in this little concrete bunker, he shot him in the leg. And Enders yelled and he fell, and I was right down in the hole. I pulled him down in the hole farther. I pulled his pants off because where he thought he got shot. Besides, he didn't seem to be yelling, but he's telling me that's where he's shot. So I pulled his pants off, and the blood was coming out thick, real bad. So I got a tourniquet to try to stop it, and we were below the range of fire. We got down in the hole. And anyway, I stopped the bleeding, and I told the other guy, he was a new guy, I said, see if you can keep the tourniquet on him. I'm going to get some more guys to try to help get Enders out of here. You can't run and carry a guy in the sand. The sand is terrible to carry somebody with. I said, if we could get maybe a stretcher, in 3 guys on each side of a stretcher, maybe we'd have a chance to get out of there. So he said he'd watch him. So in the meantime, I looked up and I thought, well, whoever shot Enders is going to shoot me, because they got a beat on us already. They know we're in that hole. So I was afraid I had to do it quick before they could get their guns over there. And I looked up and I went down and I saw a hole over there somewhere. And I ran you can't run fast on the sand either. And I ran as fast as I could. A great big hole in that sand was a good place for me to jump into. I jumped into the sand and I slid down the side, and there's 4 Japanese in the hole. They're in the hole. And I couldn't stop. If you're going down a hill in the sand and you want to stop, you can't do it. You got to go a ways. And they're all dead. They're sitting there against the wall, and they got their rifles, and they took a shell burst, and it killed them. I was glad to see that. So I got out of there as fast as I could, and I ran again. In the meantime, I got a shell burst in my back. It was behind me, and it knocked me my face down in the sand. And some of our guys were now moving up, and they picked me up, and they got a stretcher. I got a shot of morphine. It didn't hurt bad. The morphine fixed it. I was glad of that. And I got the morphine, and I told them, I says, there's a guy up in that hole over there. We got to get him out of there. It was this guy, Enders. They said they're already up there, and they got him out. They got a stretcher in there, and they got him out, and they came in force, and they must have covered that pillbox somewhat with more rifle fire, and they got him out of there. And I never saw Enders until later on in Chicago. He was a Chicago guy at that time, and I got on the stretcher, and they carried me back to a place where the recons were an international truck, and they had slides for stretchers on them. They had 3 on each side. And they slid me in one of the slides, and then I got taken down to they called it the hospital. All it was 4 posts and a canvas top. And the doctors were doing operations out there on the beach. And they had all these Marines on bodies laying all around this thing. And what do they call him? The guy who was the preacher from the Marine Corps, they had different denominations. You couldn't tell what denomination. They were all Marine uniforms. And they would go around and check all these guys on stretchers to see who was probably a good candidate to try to fix. And if you weren't, you just stayed there. I was a good candidate to fix. I was able to talk. And they told me, they said, well, they're going to get me out to the hospital ship. They had a Red Cross ship out in the water. Which I think it meant that I was pretty good, and they have a lot of stuff on the boat that would fix me up good. It was a hospital afloat. So they sent what they call I can't think of what they call it. They had a duck and a weasel. It's a small, it's a boat with wheels. And the boat would go in the sand or the boat would go in the water. So I got on that, they put me on that thing with some other guys. And we went out to this beautiful Red Cross hospital ship. It was really nice. And we got out there to the ship, and they had some cables and some ropes or something coming down to lift the stretchers up out of this weasel. Quite a few of them coming back and forth, coming off the island. So they picked us up, put us on the boat, and now we see women, nurses. The first time we saw women in a couple of years almost, you know, and they got great big scissors, and they're cutting the clothes. They're looking for how bad you are. That was a good idea, because you didn't even know where you got shot sometime. And they're cutting the clothes off the guys that could stand stood, and they just let the women cut the. It was kind of fun in a way. And then we went into a regular hospital. I don't know, everything a hospital has, they had on that ship. And that was from then on, it was all easy.
So you went from being in a foxhole, taking fire, avoiding shell burst, trying to save your buddy, to getting hit in the back and getting taken off in a stretcher.
Right.
At what point did you feel relieved that you were out of danger?
Well, I knew that when I got shot, I wasn't dead. Because the day before, another friend of mine got shot with a rifle right through this area. And when he got shot, I helped him, and I could hear the air coming out of his lungs. When you breathe, you got a hole in there. You can put your hand there, you can feel the air. When I got shot, I know I got hit in the back. It threw me down, and I was put my hand up to try to see if I could see any reflective air. I didn't. The thing was in me, it stayed. And I guess I was relieved when I got on the hospital ship, or even when I got out onto the hospital in the sand, that I was going to make it now. And for a long time, I didn't know if I ever was going to go home alive. But at that time, I was pretty sure things were going to go a little bit better.
Remember a couple minutes ago, I asked you if you were nervous.
Nervous?
Well, remember when you enlisted?
What?
When you enlisted,
yeah.
I said, "Were you nervous?" And he said, everybody wanted to."
Yeah.
Do their part.
I don't think you knew what you were getting into for sure. You just thought you did. It was worse than I thought.
When do you think you realized what you were getting yourself into?
Well, I think when I was going ashore, and I saw all those bodies in the water, they were bobbing, a lot of them. They didn't make it to Iwo Jima or ashore. And I thought, if this is just the beginning, it can't be too good. So I guess that was about it. There was also a Japanese Zero. I don't know if you know the planes, but Japan had a real nice, they call it the Zero. It was a small pursuit plane. And before we landed that day, that Zero was up there, and I think he's reconnaissance. He was taking pictures of the Americans down there shelling that island, and probably sending those pictures back to Japan some way, or at least bringing them back. And that thing was up there, and I think every ship on the island and almost every Marine with an M1 rifle was shooting at that Zero plane. The next day I saw that plane cracked up, and I saw that pilot, and I was about ready to go home. It was a mess. But, you talk about when did you decide. That was pretty bad, too, and that was the first day.
How many days were you there?
I was there about a month.
How many days were you in a firefight there?
Oh, we had days on and days off. We also had a system where if we were up at the front so many days, they would bring another group up and we would exchange positions, which gave us a little, rest. You're under stress day and night. All night long, the ships are shooting up flares, when we have, what do you call it?
Halloween or
Yeah, but not,
July?
Well, when we have all the fireworks here,
4th of July?
4th of July, you could see at night because of flares, but it was very spooky because the trees that were there were all on their side halfway. A lot of bodies laying out there, and when the flares came down, it made it look like the shadows made the trees move, and the bodies seemed to move. It'd scare you. It was a shadow, like, you know. As the flare came down, you were sure that tree was moving, so was the bodies. It was scary. Anyway, that was some of it. I don't know if I got off track here a little bit.
So do you think many of us from my generation, my parents' generation, have never seen anything like that?
Well, yeah, I don't know. But I'll tell you what I was beginning to tell you before, where I was really scared one night. When we went back and we got replaced for the day, for the night, the guys in the back would come up and take over, and we would go to the rear for a while. Well, when we would go to the rear, we got into an area that was fairly unknown to the Japanese, or at least they weren't bombing or putting mortars in there. It was a safe place. And the guys that brought our food up, our K-ration, they would bring up, sometimes peaches in a can and stuff, fruit, different things, gallon cans sealed. And we'd go over and grab them and bring them to our foxhole and cut it open, and we'd split the can, you know, and it was something that tastes pretty good, tastes better than C-ration. But anyway, and we almost always knew that we're in a fairly safe place. The Jeeps came in there with this stuff on it, and we would dig a foxhole, getting ready for tonight, because it could happen that they would start shelling that area. So two other guys and I shared a foxhole, a big foxhole that night. And it was okay. We used to flip for who had the choice. I used to like to have the last choice of watching my foxhole, because I'd stay up for the rest of the day then. You get up early in the morning, and that was my coverage, and I'd stay up. So anyway, I got the idea that I would be the last guy waking up. So we had gas masks, but the Japanese didn't use gas. We used to use them to sit on in the foxhole. It was a little box-like arrangement, and you could put it in a corner, and you could sit back and get a little rest. And you better sit there and keep your eyes open, because you were not only watching yourself, but the other two guys or the other guy. You were doing it for all of you, you see. And you look up and you put your head down, and you look up and you put your head down, and then the flares would come down, and that would give you a pretty good sight of all these foxholes. So that was okay. I thought, well, this is going to be nice. I ate these peaches in the can. I had some pretty good food, and we were in a safe place. They brought hot coffee out. The Marine Corps did, and so I thought, well, tonight is going to be a good night. It's not like it was last night when we were up in the front. And so I went in the corner, and I went to sleep sitting up. We didn't have enough room for three guys to sleep, but you could put your feet out and your back against the corner, and you'd sit there, and then you'd look, and if you had a 45, you'd put it in your, that was one of the good guns. The M1 rifle was no good. It was a good rifle, but it would always hit the walls, and it would fill up with sand, and you wouldn't shoot but maybe one or two shots. The carbine, the little short carbine the Marine Corps had, was really good. It was multi-shot, and it was fairly long range. We kept that a carbine and a 45 in our blouse, we called it. Anyway, I was sleeping, with my carbine, and in the meantime, in the early morning, I thought, geez, it's getting warm in here. And I moved. It's sticky. The whole bottom was sticky and warm. And I looked at the guy in the corner, and I moved, and he fell over. He was shot in the back of the head, and his blood was in that foxhole that deep. And that's what woke me up, I think. I was so scared I didn't know what to do. I thought the Japanese were out there with bayonets. And they knew I was in there, and they knew the other guy was in there. And I yelled to the other guy, I said, did you take a look at the glop? He was the other guy that was like this. And he says, yeah. He says, there's something wrong with him. And we moved, and he fell over. He got shot, he got a shell burst in the back of his head. And so we yelled to, at least I did, I yelled, some machine gunners were next to me about, I don't know, maybe the width of this house away. And I said, you got room for another guy? And they said they do. So I said, well, we've got one guy that's dead. This guy was dead. He fell over, back of his head was gone. There was no, to me, there was no help for him anymore anyway. So I told them, I'm coming over. They says, come on. So I went over there. The next morning, I'm scared now because this was bad. This was in the dark except when the flares were coming down. And the next morning, they used to call it the meat wagon. And you would put your dead out if you were able to, along where there was a path in the jungle, sort of. And this truck would pick up all the bodies. And there's rigor mortis sets in a person. And these guys are sitting there, even dead, they're sitting at the road dead waiting for the meat wagon. It really puts me away from, I don't want any more wars. They are terrible. But that's one time I was really scared.
Did it shape the way you live the rest of your life? Did it give you a perspective on the rest of your life with what you saw there?
You know, I don't really know. I think I was always a little bit concerned about the other guy to some degree. I don't know if it made a big difference, maybe a little difference, but it reinforced what I was thinking sometimes, and it's not a good idea to go into a war if you can help it. I think it reinforced it. Do anything. As a matter of fact, I've even thought about that. How are we going to prevent wars? The only thing I could come up with right now is a computer. Let the computer figure out if we go into a war, because the computer doesn't have any ego. Putin, for instance, has an ego, and I think that's the war over there. I don't know what else, unless somebody who's got more brains than I have would come up with a better idea. But I think a computer would be a pretty good way to figure out whether a country should put all that effort into killing other people.
What do you want our generation to know about war after experiencing it yourself?
Well, I think really to try anything first before you go to war. That's about as best as I could, close as I could get to it. I don't know exactly. I don't have the answer. Maybe I'm not smart enough, but there's a lot of other things we can do. We could talk more, even if it's just talk. It doesn't make any difference because it stops it for a while, and people in the meantime get a little bit of sense.
Get to know one another more.
Yeah.
Did you find a great purpose in life after coming back because you experienced all that hardship and all that chaos and violence?
Well, I don't know if I could really answer that because I didn't have the other experience, to compare it with. But I think it does make you a little bit maybe better a person. I guess. I don't know.
Seems hard to answer.
What's that?
Seems hard to answer.
It does. It is. It's probably impossible to answer for sure. You think you're better anyway.
A lot of veterans from World War II are known that they don't talk much about their experience. Have you talked much about your experience?
Well, I'm more loose with it now than I used to be. I used to dream about it a little bit, but I think I got to the fact that convinced myself, maybe it's worth talking about. Maybe it'll stop the next war.
Did you start sharing it with your friends and family?
Somewhat, yeah. Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Well, it's a great perspective to say, if I can share what I experienced 80 years ago, right?
Yeah.
To benefit the current generation.
Yes.
That hope that helps.
Yes. I went to visit the guy that I took that got shot in the leg. Enders, the guy. When he got shot, his wallet went flying, and I grabbed his wallet and I put it in my pocket, and I had his wallet when I got back into on the ship, and anyway, I looked him up. He was from Chicago. He had $2 in there, incidentally, and I looked him up. And when I went to Chicago, my wife and I think a couple of my daughters or something went over there to his house where he was living, and he had a false leg by this time. He was able to walk, but he had a Marine Corps dog, And I think the dog was too old, and they gave him to him if he was like animals. And he had the dog, I remember, in this park where we had a little picnic out in the park, and we talked about old times. And I gave him his wallet back. But that was kind of a nice thing, you know.
Probably the least of his concerns after he got
Oh
shot.
yeah, he didn't. Well, I thought too he had some papers in there, but he had no money. $2.
Did you leave the $2 in there?
I did.
What did you end up doing after you came back?
Well, I did the same thing. I was with the Bell system.
Oh, and you also participated in the occupation.
Oh yeah.
What did you experience there?
Go ahead.
They were afraid of you, right?
The men were extremely afraid of us, but it was just a few months before when we were, fighting them very close to their shore. They got all the information, I guess, by their radio, and they knew pretty much about what was going on Iwo Jima too, just like we did. And well, what was the question again?
They were afraid of you when you first arrived for the occupation.
Yeah, that's right. You would ask them something, and instead of them stopping to talk to you, they just run and hide behind a building or something. But they were used to everyday news, and it was terrible for them because there was so many of us killing all of them, you see. And of course, the women were not, they weren't into it like we were. And the kids, they didn't care. They didn't even, cops and robbers to them, it made no difference.
Had you met a Japanese person before that?
I met Japanese Americans in Hawaii. A lot of them. There was a lot of them there.
Was there anything you realized when you were there in Japan after the war ended and you were there as an occupier in the occupying capacity?
I realized they were a lot like us. We went to their houses. We'd go out on a weekend. We'd get off on a weekend. The war was over now. And we'd get out on a weekend. We'd take some Marine Corps sea ration because you couldn't buy any restaurant food or anything. Everything was bombed. And we'd put it in our pocket and we'd go out and we'd go through the neighborhoods. Sometimes we'd sit down on somebody's front lawn, which used to be a front lawn, and probably some of it was still there. And we'd open our sea ration and have dinner. And maybe there'd be 4 of us or something like that. And pretty soon a few kids would come around. They'd start looking at these guys, people from Mars. We were something different. And then pretty soon their mothers would come out looking for them. Pretty soon we'd try to talk to the mothers. And they'd go in the house and they'd bring us, they used chopsticks at that time. And they'd go in the house and they'd bring us American type of forks and spoons so we could eat. They were trying to be friendly. And we did the same. We didn't have a lot of trouble with them. We got to go into their homes later on. They invited us in. The Marine Corps says, don't go in. They thought that maybe we'd get killed or something, or maybe they didn't really want to give up. And they also said that we'd go in there and we'd drink sake with them and got to be pretty friendly. But we used to check the drapes because the MPs didn't want us to fraternize yet. It was too soon. But we could see it was okay. They wanted peace, so did we. So it worked out.
I forgot to ask you, did you know the guys who raised the flag at Iwo Jima?
I didn't know them, no. They were from a different unit than I was, and we didn't have that. I had maybe seen them, but I didn't know them.
What did you end up doing after you came back to the U.S.?
I went right back to the telephone company. I was in before, and I went back. They saved my job.
And you retired early, and you raised a family?
I did, yes. Yeah. Yeah, that was a good thing too. I didn't like it at first, but I think it was I lucked out.
What are the aspects of your life after the war that you cherish?
That I cherished?
Yes, sir.
Oh, I don't know. I think I had a pretty good life. I had a good marriage. I had good kids, and I was able to build my own house, which is that one in the corner with my dad, and I guess I had a pretty good life.
Well, that's all I had for you, sir. I appreciate you sharing 80 years of history.
Nice talking with
you. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Well done.